Yeah, so the first thing that jumped out to me was this jealousy that the Lord had for this people. And after reading through this Bible, I'm just like, why?
Yeah.
Like, I don't understand, Lord, because these people have turned from you. They obey you for half a second. You're frustrated. I'm frustrated watching. And, we just keep doing this back and forth. And it just seems like, once again, this previous chapter, they was being disobedient again. So why are you so jealous for them? Why do you want them back so bad? Like, why do you want to live with them? It just doesn't make sense to me.
Yo, welcome back to the Vibes Daily Podcast. It is day 277 of our year-long series we have titled Devoted, as we journey through the entire Bible from cover to cover, from Genesis to Revelation. You have joined us in the book of Zechariah, and I am back again, joined by my wife, Victoria, as we bring Zechariah to a conclusion here. 14 chapters total, and did the first 7 yesterday. We'll do the next 7 today. As I mentioned yesterday, your reading plan will have you do just through chapter 12 today and the next 2 chapters tomorrow. Feel free to continue to follow that plan to break it up, but we're just going to discuss all the way through 14 today, just to make the discussion a little bit more simple in our conversation, and we'll talk about Malachi tomorrow. But left off yesterday with God pointing out that fasting was more than just denying yourself food, but it was also, again, caring for people, how you show love to one another, being a good person, essentially, and obeying God as well, was important to him. And chapter 8, which also refers to a fast kind of at the end of this chapter, really, though, talks mostly about trying to, or speaking of this time to come, where God is ultimately going to kind of restore his people, right? He's going to be back with them again. He is jealous for them, right? But he talks about, kids playing in the streets, and just like, it just paints this picture of just like this beauty of when he will be with them and they no longer need to be afraid. What jumped out to you here in chapter 8?
Yeah, so the first thing that jumped out to me was this jealousy that the Lord had for this people. And after reading through this Bible, I'm just like, why?
Yeah.
Like, I don't understand, Lord, because these people have turned from you. They obey you for half a second. You're frustrated. I'm frustrated watching. And, we just keep doing this back and forth. And it just seems like, once again, this previous chapter, they was being disobedient again. So why are you so jealous for them? Why do you want them back so bad? Like, why do you want to live with them? It just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
And so that was the first thing that jumped out to me.
It's a good call out, because like, we could see God begrudgingly return.
Yes.
Right? Like, we could see it where he's just kind of like dragging himself back to dwell with the people. Like,
I guess.
You know what? I said I was going to do it. I'm a man of my word. I'm going to stick it out. But I don't mean I got to be happy about it.
Yeah.
That don't mean I got to like it. You know what I'm saying? Like,
just be like miserable, bitter in marriage, right? Like that old bitter man is like, I said I was going to stay married, so.
Yeah, like, he's more committed to the covenant than he is to the actual people. You know what I'm saying? Like, he could have been. And that's good to point out that, like, he really loves this people.
Yeah.
Like, he loves them.
Yeah.
Despite all of that.
Yeah.
In fact, probably not even because of all that, but just despite all of who they are and what they've done, he just loves them. And I think it's important to point that out. That's good.
Yeah. He shows us what it really truly means to love somebody. Like, to keep no record of wrongs. Yeesh.
Yeah.
And to hope for the best.
Yeah.
He's really doing it. And so, like, he even just goes to say in verse 6, so, like, he's naming all these things that's going to be possible, right? You mentioned the boys playing in the streets and stuff. But he's just like, though it may seem impossible to the remnant of this people in those days, should it also seem impossible to me? And so I love that, because I'm just like, the Lord is like, what's impossible in your eyes is not impossible for me. Like I see what can happen. Like I can see the potential, but you can't see the potential because you're limited. But I see it.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. I think the thing that probably jumped out to me was, we had this conversation, I think it was last week, where we talked about all the things that like God had taken from them, he essentially restored. And this was like, I think this is back in Joel, when it was kind of all the things that had devoured, right? Like those things that happened. But I love verse 13, which says, as you have been a curse among the nations, house of Judah and the house of Israel, so I will save you and you will be a blessing.
Yeah.
Right. So like in the same way that you had become a curse,
yes.
right? In the same way that you are a curse, like I'm actually going to flip that on its head and make you a blessing. And I just thought it was a beautiful thing, because to me, it just speaks to the idea that like he can take even that thing that was again meant for evil, or maybe even you used for evil, and use it for good instead. And I was gonna say, I think that thought is actually continued in the idea of these fasts kind of becoming feasts, right? So like, because in the same way that curse is becoming a blessing, right? Verse 18 says, and the word of the Lord of armies came to me. The Lord of armies says, the fast of the 4th month, the fast of the 5th, and the fast of the 7th, and the fast of the 10th will become times of joy, gladness, and cheerful festivals for the house of Judah. Right. And so like fasts are typically like solemn and mourning and like, sorrowful, just like times, but now it's becoming cheerful and joyful and glad. And so I was like, just the idea that like he's turning these seasons of, like you said, whether it's cursing to blessing or even fasting to feasting, I just think it's just really beautiful imagery.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah. Anything else you had in 8?
Yeah, I think when I read verse 23, it says, the Lord of armies says this, in those days 10 men from nations of every language will grab the robe of a Jewish man tightly, urging, let's go with you, for we have heard that God is with you. And I don't know why, but I was like, is this when Jesus comes and like the people are just flocking to Jesus to like hear him preach or hear him teach or do miracles or whatever? Like, oh, I heard God's among you and he's a preacher and you guys call him Messiah, like, and they all flocked to him. I don't know, I just had this thought imagery when I saw that, but not saying that's what the text specifically says here. But
yeah, I mean, it's possible. I mean, even if we go into 9, right? Like 9 is we get kind of a well-known prophecy of Jesus, one that comes to pass on what we now know as Palm Sunday, right? Essentially, but 9 starts with kind of just this judgment first of kind of these enemies of Jerusalem, but then goes into, starting at verse 9, this rejoice greatly, and talks about this king that's coming, who's going to be humble and riding on a donkey, on a colt, so that's where we kind of get that image. But so again, it's very, very possible. What jumps out to you here in chapter 9 specifically as you're reading this one?
Yeah, but I love, like you said, right after you mentioned that this Messiah is like coming in this donkey in verse 10, it's like, and he will proclaim peace to the nations, right? And like this peace, and that was interesting because right after this, like the Lord is saying in verse like 13 and 14 how like Judah is my bow and I'll rise your son Zion against your son's Greece and different things like that, and I'll make you like a warrior's sword. And it's kind of like he's declaring war with Judah, but establishing peace at the same time, right? Like for them. And so it was interesting that like I can see why the people thought that when the Messiah came on this donkey, we was about to get with it. Like we was about to get this sword going and we was about to rise up this army. And I can see why they say, because it's like, yes, he's going to bring peace, and the peace in this text looks like war to get our peace. Yeah. And so and this continuance of like the Lord of armies, the Lord God will sound the trumpet, right? But we all knew what the trumpet was. Like it's wartime, right? And the Lord will defend them and consume, conquer with sling stones. And so I think it was just interesting that the Lord was saying in this way that he was going to use the people, right? Like, I'm going to use Judah as my bow, right?
Yeah.
And I could just see how they probably thought that that's what was going to happen, but definitely not what happened.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, verse 16 says, the Lord their God will save them on that day, right? And so, like, just even, again, when so many of the prophecies prior to this have been literal, right? And even, as you said, this particular one, he literally rides in on a donkey in a colt, right? So, like, yeah, I could very easily understand that if I'm reading that and I'm going, well, let's just keep reading, what else is going to happen? That I would take that to mean the same thing. And so, yeah, it's very easy to understand why that was the interpretation, right? And the understanding, or the expectation, I should say. And why Jesus had to do so much undoing, you know, to kind of clarify some of that as well. But
even like you said, like, it could have been happening, but it's in the spiritual realm, though, right? Like, not saying the Lord even just didn't do it, but like Jesus is like, I'm going to do that for you. Like, now right now I'm just teaching you how to be better people and how to live, right? And how to accept my salvation, because I am going to go to work on your behalf. And I think that was the other thing that jumped out to me, was kind of like just seeing this background imagery of the Lord at work for us. When he said Lord of Armies, like, it hits different to me now.
Yeah. It's good. Okay. Well, chapter 10, we get a picture of the Lord restoring his people, and just kind of how he strengthens them and brings them back, and things of this nature. We get this picture early on, even just about rain, and how he'll bring them, you know, crops in the field and things of this nature, contrary to, you know, what the false prophets and diviners and what they have kind of offered, these empty promises. But yeah, what jumps out to you here in chapter 10, in this particular poem?
Yeah, I mean, it's beautiful. Well, I mean, at first he starts about like how he's angry at these shepherds and these leaders, right? That he's going to punish these leaders in verse 3. But like you said, he gives a little bit more prophecy with this cornerstone. Yeah, he gives us like this cornerstone that will come from Judah, which we know is like Jesus, right? But I love when we got to like verse 6 here. He's saying, I will restore them because I have compassion on them, and they will be as though I have never rejected them. For I'm the Lord their God, and I will answer them. And I think that's just beautiful, like this compassionate God, where he's just like, it will be as if this never happened. And I just know that they're waiting for that moment.
Yeah. I'll say, I think probably what was interesting to me was the references to Ephraim, which we know is a reference to Israel rather than just Judah.
Yeah.
Which we'll kind of see another reference here in 11 kind of about that. But I do just love this unity, this kind of bringing back together of Israel and Judah, and kind of referring to both of them specifically. And even just, you know, verse 10 was talking about bringing them back from the land of Egypt and gathering them from Assyria.
Right.
But yeah, I just love that reuniting, this emphasis, or this picture of reuniting Judah and Israel specifically as well. So.
Right. And not just reuniting them, and then in verse 11, like he says, like the pride of Assyria will be brought down, the scepter of Egypt will come to an end, right? Like, I'm going to unite you guys, but then your enemies, I'm going to deal with them still.
Yeah.
Which, like you said, this just continues to be the same rhetoric.
Yeah, same message. Okay. Well, we do get a very interesting chapter in 11. 11 kind of talks about, or it really kind of calls Zechariah to be the shepherd, essentially, of his people. And it's very interesting because it kind of goes back and forth between like what Zechariah is doing versus what God is going to do, you know, kind of in this. But it's a very interesting thing because he's called, and he has these two staffs, one called favor and one called union. And there's kind of this imagery or this vision that kind of comes out of that that's very, very interesting. What jumped out to you about 11? I have some thoughts, but just what jumped out to you about 11?
You go first.
Well, I mean, the biggest thing was really obviously this reference to Judas that's here in 11, right? So this is verse 11.
11, yep.
11. It says, it was annulled on that day. And so the oppressed of the flock who was watching me knew that it was the word of the Lord. And then I said to them, if it seems right to you, give me my wages, but if not, keep them. So they weighed my wages, 30 pieces of silver.
Yeah.
Throw it to the potter, the Lord said to me. This magnificent price I was valued by them. So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw it into the house of the Lord to the potter. And just like one, we know Jesus was betrayed for 30 pieces of silver by Judas. We also know he used that to buy a potter's field, right? Ultimately, where he, eventually took his own life, which we'll get to next week when we get the Matthew's story, or Matthew's account. But I don't know. It was just very interesting to see that reference to him and that prophecy as well, of kind of pointing out what will happen, specifically with Judas there.
Yeah. I did love that because it comes behind, like you said, like a verse 7 and plenty of others here, but it comes behind these verses. I will even back up to, what's this, 5 or 6, where it says, like, even their own shepherds have no compassion for them. Indeed, I will no longer have compassion on the inhabitants of the land. This is the Lord's declaration. Instead, I'll turn everyone over to his neighbors and the king, right? But then now will not rescue it from their hands. So pretty much now I, Jesus, shepherded the flock intended for slaughter, and I am the oppressed of the flock, right? Like I took the 2 staffs, you said, as myself, right? And I got rid of those shepherds who were not dealing with my people, who were not shepherding my people. So, sorry, in a nutshell, these shepherds were supposed to shepherd my people. They didn't. So I took those oppressed, right? As Jesus is saying, like I took them and I shepherded them. But yet they just handed me over to be killed, right? For 30 pieces of silver. And so, it is hard to just like watch this after we hear things like the Lord just saying, I'm jealous for my people. Like I'm jealous for my people, yet your people are not going to appreciate you shepherding them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's rough. Like I said, we're gonna get into a lot of this. I'm in some ways kind of glad we get to Zechariah at this point, because again, we're gonna get to Jesus next week, right? And so this will be back to back. We'll see a lot of these prophecies kind of come to fulfillment and be able to even point back to Zechariah. But this is exactly how Jesus is treated. And what he kind of points out, even people just, again, falling away from him, even those that were his apostles, right? Like many of them weren't present there when he's crucified,
right?
They're denying him and those kind of things. So very interesting reference there. But chapter 12, we kind of get this pronouncement. It's a very interesting passage. And I think probably what sticks out to me most is probably the end of this first part of 12. I know we have this piece about this pierced one that's going to be referred to as 10, but even a little bit before that, man, God just talks about how great Judah will be.
Yes.
Will be. Even to the point that he compares it to say, like, I mean, the weakest and the least of this new Judah in Jerusalem is going to be greater than like David, which we already know he holds him in high esteem. Like that's a pretty big deal.
That's your boy.
Yeah. So like that's verse 8, right? That it's just like, on that day, the Lord will defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem, so that on that day, the one who is weakest among them will be like David on that day, and the house of David will be like God, like the angel of the Lord before them. And so, I was like, man, that's what a way to elevate Judah. You know, that's serious esteem from God's perspective. But what would you find interesting here in chapter 12?
Yeah. Well, that part I did as well, but also just how the Lord started it off in verse 1 and how he spoke about himself. Sometimes he doesn't remind them all the time of who he is. I feel like this one was one of those moments where he was like, the declaration of the Lord who stretched out the heavens, laid the foundation of the earth, and formed the spirit of man within him. And a lot of times the Lord hasn't been doing all of that. Of like, let me remind you who I am. Now he gets buck in Malachi. But here we don't really see those preludes often. So here we see him just reminding him, like, not only like am I declaring to you this, like, I am the one who formed all of the heavens. I laid the foundation of the earth. And all of you, all of man, I have breathed my spirit in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that was just interesting for me to just see him lay that out before he goes into trying to convince us of what he will do, right? Because now it's like, okay, if you have done all that, I guess I have to like believe that you can make Judah like this or Jerusalem like this, so that you can make the least of us as great as David. Like, because in my mind, I'm just like, how? And as we have seen, the people struggled to see it because it didn't really happen that way, right? And so we just have to assume that we're just still hoping for this Jerusalem that's still yet to come, that's in the future.
Yeah.
But not saying that the Lord is false in what he's saying, but just it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. That's good. Yeah, pay attention, when he speaks on himself for sure.
On me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's rare. That's a good throwback to a previous episode. But yeah, so 12 ends with this reference to this pierced one and the spirit of grace and prayer that's going to be poured out upon these residents. But again, refers to himself as the pierced one. This again is a reference to Jesus, right? Who will be pierced, as Isaiah reminded us or informed us kind of before. Kind of ends interesting where these people are like mourning by their own families. Candidly, didn't completely understand the point of that and like why that is and whatnot. But yeah, every family's mourning by themselves, which is interesting. But then we get into 13 and man, he just really kind of talks about, again, we get another reference to being pierced there in verse 4. I'm sorry, in verse 3. That is, sorry. My numbers are running together here. But yeah, but this message about this prophet again, or these prophecies, I should say, that are coming. But it's just really about kind of cleansing these people, right? Just kind of like taking what was unclean, what was these improper prophecies, whatever the case may be, and kind of making those right. That was kind of the gist of what I got from it. But what did you understand here in 13?
Yeah, it to me it was just like this trembling of like the Lord's not going to speak for a while, right? And he's like cleansing people away, and so like the Lord's not going to be speaking. So like anybody who tries to say that he's a prophet, like they're gonna be like, straight up, you lying, because we ain't heard from a prophet in 100 years, right? So I think that's what it would stick out to me in here. But can I go back to 12 real quick?
Sure.
Because I just had a thought. Like when you said these people were mourning, though, I was like, well, maybe they're mourning because they didn't recognize the Messiah, right? That like, here the Messiah was coming and they're anticipating it, and then this day has come, but then they're all going to mourn because they missed him.
Yeah, like I said, it's very, very much possible, which we know happened. I just find it interesting that they're doing it like by themselves. That makes sense, right? Was kind of one of the things, but yeah, that's very, very much possible.
Yeah. But anyways, or maybe they're disciples who are scattered. I don't know. Who knows? Well, make it plain. Make it plain for the people. we trying over here. We're trying.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I'm sorry. My mind was stuck there, so I couldn't fully move on to 13 as I was dwelling in that thought. So let me just cleanse my thought the way the Lord has cleansed these people, and move on.
Yeah. No. Yeah, that was interesting. You bring again a reference to this third. Like, I feel like we've seen this before in this prophecies. This is verse 9. I'll put a third through the fire, refine them as silver is refined, and test them as gold is tested. 2/3 of them will be cut off and die. That was the verse 8, right? But there will be a third left in it, and they will call on my name, and I will answer them, and I will say they are my people, and they will say the Lord is our God. So I don't know, just seeing that reference again, I think we've seen that number of a third kind of mentioned before, right? A third, or this happens to one third, this happens to another third, but ultimately,
Yeah.
a third is left. So
Yeah.
That's interesting. But
yeah, it's like the Lord's just like really, like you said, he's cleansing his people here and purifying them. And I feel like when I read this, I had the song Refiner in my head, of course, right? But then it is only until after that happens that they call on his name and that he accepts them as theirs. But like there has to be this purification process, which I believe, like you said, was Jesus coming to like literally like this shepherd really like to take away the sins, right? To burn, like to wash away the sins, which is verse 1, right? Like on that day, a fountain will be opened for the house of David and for the residents of Jerusalem to wash away sin and impurity. On that day, this is the declaration of the Lord of armies. I will remove the names of the idols from the land. They'll no longer be remembered. And I will banish the prophets and the unclean spirit from the land. And so yeah, for me, it's just like this cleansing process, like it probably can only really happen with Jesus, right? Where like then he can really restore this relationship between us and Christ and call us his and we call him ours. Right?
Yeah, it's good. Well, speaking of on that day, I feel like that was the theme of 14 to me.
Yeah.
Because it was like a day belonging to the Lord is coming is kind of what it starts with. And then verse 6 on that date, verse 8 on that day, verse 20 on that day.
Yes.
Like, it was just kind of like on that day,
All these days.
on that day, just to be clear, on that day.
And I got my hand up, like, what day? And he's not going to answer. He's not going to tell us what day.
Only the Father knows.
Only the Father knows.
But yeah, what jumped out to you in 14 as we close out Zechariah?
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, the Lord is rising up and he's about to fight, right? On verse 3. And then just this reassurance of like his people, right? That like there will never again be a curse of complete destruction. So that Jerusalem will dwell in security. And that's verse 11 that I'm reading right here. But I don't know, it's just so much comfort. Like the Lord is coming to save you guys. Like, and he's going to come to conquer, be victorious, reign. You will no longer be disgraced. So it's like this book is like ending on a high note. When this will happen, we don't know, but just ending on a high note.
Yeah, and again, it's a day of conquering, man. It's a day, like you said, of victory. My Bible uses the title just like triumph, like, like I said, it's been really one of my takeaways the last few kind of weeks as we've been in these prophets that just like, again, I probably bring up again when we get to Malachi, but just that like that day, as triumphant as it is, right, and all the victory that it speaks of, is only that for those on the right side, because for everybody else, like, I'm sorry, we're talking plagues, we're talking no light, no sunlight, and moonlight are diminishing, right? Like, we're talking, like you said, a fight that's going on.
Like a famine in verse 17.
Yeah, like I'm like, this sounds terrible.
Yeah, you're right. I was glass half full.
This sounds there will be punishment for this sounds terrible for everybody else. For anybody that's not on the right side of this sounds terrible. And I think that's the piece that's like jumping out. I'm like, the day will be great. It will. How great depends on what side you're on.
I mean, according to verse 17, if you don't go up to this temple to worship, right? Like, if you don't worship the king, he didn't even say temple, but does he say temple? I don't think he does. If you don't go up to Jerusalem to worship the king, right? Yeah, rain will not fall on you, right? And I just think about Egypt. I'm just like, Egypt's drier than dry right now. Like, it's real dry. It's real hot. Dust, wind, storms, and all that. Just like, can y'all just go up to Jerusalem and just seek the Lord so you can get some rain?
It's hilarious.
That was my only thought.
You think it would work that way?
I don't know. I was just hoping.
It's worth a shot, though.
It's worth a shot. It's worth a trek. It's worth a trek. Saddle the camels. Let's go.
It was hilarious.
It's hot. You not thirsty? I'm thirsty just thinking about it.
No, I'm not actually.
I can't even imagine. Anyways, I can do this all night. Sorry.
You haven't been to Egypt?
No, but just the thought, babe. Like it's like 120 degree. What? No. Fahrenheit? No. Mm-mm.
Sure hope so. Celsius would be like dying. You'd be dead.
Yeah, we're dead.
But yeah, but that's how it ends. And like I said, we'll pick up on Malachi tomorrow to kind of hear some of the final words before Jesus comes. And because again, chronologically, even Malachi is kind of the last
word.
So looking forward to that. Again, hopefully this was helpful as you read through Zechariah. I know we got to a couple chapters that you'll touch on tomorrow if you read according to the plan, but hopefully this gives you that complete picture of Zechariah. We'll pick up tomorrow with the book of Malachi with our last book of the Old Testament.
Yay.
But look forward to seeing you then. Until then, take care.
Thank you for joining us for the Vibes Daily Podcast. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or download our favorite, the Vibes Church app. Visit vibes.church/devoted for additional episodes, notes, details, and the latest merch. Join us next time as we continue our journey through the Bible. Take good care.